Hey everyone, welcome to my living room. You are in my Christmas tree corner. The tree herself, she's just out of frame, although here's a photo of the corner so you can see her in her glory. We've got the little bottom of my stockings up here, one for me, Mark, and Mona. We also have my Christmas crackers, because if the British did one thing right, and we know that's a short list, but they did one thing right, it is giving out Christmas crackers. I love putting them on plates during holiday dinner parties. These are full of chocolate. I'm actually gonna get some more probably tomorrow. But anyway, in the midst of all of this sort of holiday whimsy and delight, I'm actually here to talk to you about one of JD Vance's tweets, unfortunately. And I know that you are probably saying, well, Chelsea, why are you even on Twitter in the first place? It's an absolute cesspit. You haven't even posted there in multiple years, all of which I would say you're right about. And yes, it's still Twitter to me if Elon Musk refuses to address his own daughter by her name and pronouns. I'm certainly not going to call the company he wildly overpaid for by the name he prefers. So anyway, I do not tweet, and it is completely accurate to say that it is an absolute, unless you are rigorously sorting by either content you're looking for or people you follow, it is an absolute hellhole of far-right content. And I think it's worth noting that, yes, some of it is more sort of, let's say, within the realm of political discourse, but a lot of it is just, it'll be just like a video of an Indian person going about their day with just the most eye-wateringly racist commentary you have ever seen under it, or like, commentary about, I don't know, gay people being an abomination, or just, I mean, to me, it feels like 4chan. Not that I was ever, frequenting that website, but it's what I sort of imagined it to have been. And this is all kind of jumbled up together because the algorithm is pushing just such an extreme level of right-wing content that you get that. And then you also get pretty much every single person in the current administration, top of feed if you're looking at the For You page, which is sad. And I think some of this might be the fact that my Twitter account, after I stopped using it, was briefly hacked by a crypto scam, and I did end up getting it back. But suffice to say, I think they did a little damage while they were in there. Also, lol at the idea of taking over my account specifically to shill crypto. But anyway, all of that is to say, I log on occasionally, if I'm being honest, when something of note is happening on any of the reality TV shows I watch. And a lot has been happening in the Bravoverse lately. So sometimes I go on Twitter as a backup. If I'm not getting the juicy discourse I want from Reddit, I'll go on Twitter to see what the girls are saying. And as often happens when I log on to Twitter, I opened up the app to a tweet from Vice President JD Vance. And I want to say this first and foremost. Part of the reason that this tweet has really just like, I've taken such psychic damage from it and feel so despairing seeing not just the tweet itself, but the fact that it has over 100,000 likes, that people are clearly really responding to it. Both because of what it says on its face, and I'll read it out in a minute, but also because I think there has been this kind of sentiment, which to me feels a little naively optimistic, that, if and when Trump leaves office, which will inevitably happen one way or another, unless, the meteor strikes us first, which will, we can't necessarily rule that out, but provided everything else goes according to plan, like eventually he'll be gone. And I think there's often this kind of idea that the coalition will fall apart without him, that he's sort of, keeping the emperor's new clothes illusion intact, and that someone like a JD Vance, as much eyeliner as he may be wearing, just simply does not have the riz required, the je ne sais quoi, to keep this really tenuous and, quite frankly, totally ideologically incoherent base together. That's kind of the sentiment. And I actually, again, as contemptible a human as I find JD Vance, and as much as I resent every single person involved in the hillbilly elegy phenomenon, and yes, I include Glenn Close in that, I actually do think he kind of has what it takes. I actually do think that he's playing into such a sort of cynical and sinister idea of what America First is or should be. And a tweet like this and the response that it's gotten to me is a perfect example. So I want to just read it out, and then we'll discuss it. It's a long one. They apparently on Twitter, you can just write, multi-page essays, but so lock in. After 4 years of house prices doubling, and in some areas tripling, many young people feel priced out of the American dream of homeownership. We're on the same page so far. A welfare fraud scandal in Minnesota reveals that large numbers of new arrivals aren't assimilating and are funneling our tax dollars to literal terrorist groups. ? An innocent woman was set on fire in Chicago as the mayor resists federal law enforcement resources to bring peace to one of our great cities. Okay. The Obamacare insurance system is buckling under its own weight, and the country is $38 trillion in debt. Continuing. Our administration is working hard on addressing all of these problems. But you know what really fires up the Beltway GOP? Not any of the above. Instead, the political class is really angry that the Trump administration may finally bring a 4-year conflict in Eastern Europe to a close. I'm not even talking about the substance of their views. Much of what these people have said about the Ukraine war has been proven wrong, but whatever, we can agree to disagree. But the level of passion over this one issue when your country has serious problems is bonkers. It disgusts me. Show some passion for your own country. Okay, so there's obviously quite literally a lot going on in this tweet, right? We start with young people are priced out of the American dream of homeownership, to which I would say a resounding yes, correct. And I think that if you were to map out any macroeconomic reasons as to why they are priced out of homeownership, that list would be very long, and we'll get into that in a moment. But I don't think any of it would have to do people in Minnesota committing welfare fraud or someone being set on fire in Chicago or Obamacare. Or Ukraine for that matter. I actually don't think that those are, perhaps there's some overlap on those Venn diagrams, but I would say those are actually, for the most part, completely unrelated issues to the fact that young Americans are priced out of homeownership. But I do think that there is a level of kind of savvy in this tweet that a lot of people, a lot of progressives really underestimate. In our video essays, a lot of them do focus on things like class inequality and why things are getting so expensive and why so many basic aspects of adult life in America, especially middle-class adult life, feel completely out of reach. It feels like there no longer is a middle class. By some measures, groceries are about 30% more expensive now than they even were in 2020, which was already a time of, where people were feeling unable to make ends meet. And so we, in almost a monthly basis, we dive into these problems, and the answers to them aren't simple necessarily because there are often many factors at play, but they are pretty tangible, right? And if you want to use the issue of homeownership and why that feels so inaccessible, I think there are a few really key reasons why that is the case. Now, one is obviously just point blank wages have stagnated. We have not kept up with minimum wage since the 70s. So just on a purely functional level, most people are not earning enough money to be priced into the housing market just by sort of not pegging the wages that we're earning to what it actually costs to live. Now, that can also be said for many, many, many other aspects of cost of living, but homeownership is one of them. Second of all, home prices have exploded in the past 30 years, even well outpacing inflation, even well outpacing, the growth and cost of other commodities. And there are, I think, a lot of reasons for that. One of them being that we are not creating enough affordable housing, especially in densely populated areas. But another being that for a large portion of the boomers who are at or entering retirement age, their home is a huge part of their nest egg, of the wealth that they're relying on to retire. Them buying a home in the 70s for $50,000 or whatever, and then selling it for 1.2 million. That's a huge part of what they're counting on to be able to, fucking move to Naples, Florida, and do whatever they're going to do down there. Judging by the stats, move into some sort of gated retirement community and give each other STDs. That seems like a lot of what's happening in these communities. But all of that is to say, there is clearly, while wages have essentially stagnated, there's also been an explosion in what we are expecting to charge people for housing. But in addition to not having enough affordable housing being built, there is also the issue that a humongous amount of the housing stock is being bought up, not by individuals, but by corporations and in many cases, private equity. This is a massive problem in almost every housing market across the country, where the quote unquote starter homes are no longer being bought by individuals. Like in the best case, you're maybe selling it to like a small time Airbnb slumlord essentially. But in many cases, you're just selling them to, conglomerates or corporations or private equity, or in, super ultra luxe housing markets like here in Manhattan. They're often just being sold to foreign investors, just essentially as pure investments. These are never even being lived in. You're not even competing with, in most cases, other human beings, but even when you are competing with other human beings, you're not competing with them on the same terms or even for the same things. These are not two middle-class families competing, bidding over each other to buy a small 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. This is, a middle-class family, or what's left of a middle-class family, competing against essentially an entity with limitless resources who has no intention or need of actually living in these properties. And so for me, when you look at the causes of this, and then you also have, in many cities, there's a huge part of the lack of housing stock is really poor zoning laws. There's increasingly few very desirable places to live because industry is becoming more concentrated as more areas in the country no longer have, physical production or sustainable sources of jobs. Like, there are many reasons for this, but essentially, if you wanted to paint a quick picture, you could say that people aren't earning enough money to pay these ultra inflated home prices. And even if they do, they are no longer competing in anything resembling a fair or normal competition. They are competing with, again, faceless entities who have limitless resources to buy up as many properties as they want and do with them as they will. So these are structural issues. In many cases, they are issues of regulation, of zoning. There's also the issue that compared to other developed countries, we are not nearly subsidizing the purchase of first-time primary residences, that we are just not prioritizing the needs or interests of the middle class at basically every level. And we are allowing corporate interest, private equity, and the wealthy essentially step in and reap all the benefits. This is a problem that is basically replicated across almost every sector of our economy and every aspect of daily American life. And again, it's not a simple issue, but it is pretty concrete, and you can trace a lot of these numbers in very literal and easy ways. But JD Vance, and kind of by extension MAGA, is not actually interested in interrogating, let alone solving, any of those very real issues. JD Vance in particular, like the extent to which he is tied up in the same private equity interests that are gutting and hollowing out not just the American housing market, but small agriculture throughout the United States is, essentially impossible to overstate the scale of at this point. Like, JD Vance is very much personally invested in a scenario where small farmers across the country are essentially squeezed out of existence, and private equity can step in and buy all of that land and all of those resources, machinery, et cetera, livestock, for pennies on the dollar. At the end of the day, and this is why I think Hillbilly Elegy as a work and as a quote unquote memoir of any kind was such a farce, is that his interests have always been very firmly aligned with not just the capital owning class, but the corporate class in America. And I do think there is an aspect of that is America first, but it's strictly sort of American oligarchy first. Like, I do think that he wants the most moneyed business interests in America to succeed over, let's say, Chinese business interests. But I think that's pretty much it. I don't think he's really all that invested in, basically any American further down the economic ladder, and certainly the least of which being, the working poor from Appalachia that he, in my view, has more than anything utter contempt for, if you actually read his work. But I say all of this to say, at the end of the day, he's not stupid, right? Like, he understands that even though he is not personally interested in actually stepping in and reversing course on some of these horrendous, unsustainable trends in our housing market, he knows that his base is. He knows that his base is feeling this squeeze, that they don't feel that they can access any of these things that their parents had, that they're priced out of so many markets, that they're even at this point basically priced out of the grocery store. So of course he's going to allude to it. Of course he's going to make that the big, bold statement at the top of his tweet. And then everything underneath it just becomes more and more and more of a non sequitur that is essentially totally unrelated to the issue of housing. There's been so much debate over what ultimately cost Kamala Harris the election, but one thing that's pretty much not debatable is that for most voters, the economy, whatever that means in individuals' minds, was the top of people's issues on both sides of the aisle. So he obviously knows that starting with what is a very real world, quote unquote, kitchen table kind of economic issue is going to get people's attention, and it's going to make him immediately seem more sympathetic, more plugged in, more sort of relatable to the sort of average middle or working class viewer. But again, we state the issue and very intentionally blow right past it and go to a bunch of other sort of a checklist of grievances. Now, are people committing welfare fraud in Minnesota? I'm reading the tweet. Are people committing welfare fraud in Minnesota? Maybe. I'm sure they probably are. Groups of people committing welfare fraud is not new. It's not unique to America. It's pretty much as old as welfare itself. I'm sure that some people are probably getting away with some welfare fraud as we speak in my own city. And that's just kind of part of the deal, right? My view, obviously, is that even if a bunch of people were getting one over on the welfare system, it is still woefully insufficient from what we need, and moreover, no reason not to have it. And if anything, it's a reason to invest more in these systems, which are constantly being gutted so that there can be more oversight and protection for fraud and abuse. But even if we grant it completely on its face, welfare fraud is happening in Minnesota. Okay, I assume, based on the new arrivals terrorist groups, I assume this is a group of immigrants, an immigrant community that's being targeted here or being singled out. Yeah, let's just say that's all true. Sources are telling me this appears to be speaking specifically about the Somali community in Minnesota. Okay, granted on its face, sure, this is happening. What the fuck does that have to do with Americans not being able to purchase starter homes anymore? That is on every level a complete non sequitur and has nothing to do with it. But by putting them next to each other, it feels like it's not only in some ways sort of causal to the problem, or at least one factor that's aggravating it, but it feels like he is doing something really tangible, at least by identifying an issue towards solving that problem. Again, even though it's completely unrelated. I would say even further away in the solar system of what's related to the housing market is an innocent woman being set on fire in Chicago. I don't doubt that happened. I'm sure that happened. Violent crime happens every day in America, quite a lot of it in major cities, most of it via gun violence. I don't even want to go down that road because it's such a sort of non-starter in these conversations. But suffice to say, again, what the fuck does that have to do with housing costs? It has literally nothing to do with housing costs. And the Obamacare insurance system is buckling under its own weight, absolutely. And the fact that the big, beautiful bill just did everything in its power to gut what little coverage it was providing to Americans, to me at this point, it's almost sort of comical the way that they are rifling through your pockets and then laughing in your face about it. Yes, the Obamacare quote unquote setup is buckling under its own limitations and its own expenses. And you've just done everything in your power to kick out the last remaining leg the table had under it. And even still, even irrespective of what is happening or not happening with our current medical system, what does that have to do with the housing market? And then we get onto Ukraine, then we get into all these other things that are just, the contempt to me that this shows for the audience that is not just reading it, but sharing it, feeling riled up for it is just, it's really depressing on some level, right? And even the fact that he manages to throw in, you know what really fires up the Beltway GOP, as if he himself is not the Beltway GOP? He is literally the GOP in the White House. There is no one who is more of an insider, more of a sort of power that be than the person who's literally in the White House as we speak. And yet that rhetoric just allows you to put this sort of, vague, nonsensical, obviously not true separation between you and institutional power in Washington. So you get to both wield that power and everything that comes along with it, but also sort of rhetorically distance yourself from it and pretend as if you are so far removed from the GOP in Washington, D.C., as if they don't move, I would say 92% lockstep on all of these issues. And I'll have to go back and double check what the congressional numbers are as far as voting records over the past year, but it's pretty far up there. Like we're clearly on the same team here. We clearly share a lot of interests, the highest of which being sort of total corporate impunity. As someone who not just cares about these issues, as we all do, I think, as we all feel very affected by, this sort of never-ending economic roller coaster, but who also talks about them, whose career is primarily focused on trying to translate a lot of these things, a lot of these concepts, stats, economic realities into videos that people will want to like and watch and share, and will feel entertained by. There is something very despairing, honestly, to me, that makes me despair about seeing such craven recapture of the language of the working and middle classes, of the language of people who are very, very genuinely economically oppressed and whose economic opportunity is being very intentionally and systemically taken away from them. To see that rightful anger and to see that sort of existential frustration be co-opted and channeled into something so nakedly unrelated and so nakedly against their own interests. Like this tweet, other than starting with commentary about the housing market, doesn't even make the most minor attempt to connect anything else he's saying to the actual problem of the housing market. It's essentially just saying like, wow, you guys are really struggling out there. That sucks. Anyway, did you hear about these immigrants that are stealing money? Like it's just obviously these unrelated things are, even if they were quote unquote solved tomorrow, are still not addressing what you're clearly using to reel people in with, what you are clearly identifying as the most valid or most pressing issue. Because again, your base understands that that is their most pressing issue, that total, essentially, that the total economic erosion of the middle class on basically every functional level is their most pressing issue. So you're going to start by identifying that and then just continually redirect them to a million different things that, again, even if they were totally true as represented and even if they were solved tomorrow, would still not address the initial problem that you brought them in with. Is so cynical. It's actually shocking to me that trans people were not thrown under the bus in this tweet. I was sure that was coming after we talked about Ukraine. And again, to use that reference to the Beltway GOP, who doesn't care about the issues of the average American, as if you are not also part of that. I've been thinking a lot about the election of Zoran Mamdani and how heartened I feel by that, and how much I think it says about what is possible in not just the largest city in the country, but in cities all over the country. The way that his victory was so squarely based on, a focus on economic issues and a focus on things that impact real Americans, that much of his victory involved, sort of reconverting people who voted for Trump in 2024. I think I've mentioned this before, but I canvassed all day outside a polling station in New York City on Election Day 2024. It was the first time that I had partially canvassed in Spanish. It was a heavily Latino neighborhood. Almost every single person that I spoke to in Spanish volunteered the information. We don't ask, you're not allowed to. Volunteered the information that they were voting for Trump. When you look at the gains that Trump made in New York City, it was primarily in, lower income communities, Black and brown communities, immigrant communities, in the outer boroughs. Like, these were not the voting patterns that we saw in New York City, which saw the greatest increase for Trump in the 2024 election, did not fall along the most stereotypical lines that you often see, Trump voters painted with. And so the fact that Zoran Mamdani was able to win a lot of these people back, to focus so clearly and unapologetically on an economic message, and really never throw any other interests under the bus in order to get there, is so heartening for me, right? But then I see a tweet like this, and I see how, with such craven, cynical, almost lazy invocation of very real economic concerns, against Zoran Mamdani, you can't win, right? Because he will double down on exactly what you're saying, but point out the fact that nothing that you followed up your initial complaint with has anything to do with the initial complaint. And he'll actually address some real issues. But if you're talking about like a Chuck Schumer, a Joe Biden, a Kamala Harris, like, you probably can seem, by comparison, like much more of an economic populist. Because, and I think when I look back at the 2024 election, one of the things that I think most acutely hurt Biden, and then by extension Harris, was the misalignment between focusing on the economic recovery and the positive sort of macroeconomic indicators that were very real in 2024. Like, there were very good macroeconomic indicators during that time, and the recovery post-pandemic under Biden was actually much better than in many other developed countries, and there were real victories to celebrate. But you can't tell people to their face, who are struggling on a day-to-day basis to afford groceries, or who can't buy a home even though they've worked a full-time job their whole adult life, that everything is great. They will not only not believe you, they will resent you. They will view you as completely out of touch and frankly contemptible. And I do think that the lack of even paying lip service to a lot of very real economic suffering in this country, that is often, the case of many sort of national level Dems, is like, you are just opening up a freshly waxed ballroom floor for the most insidious, again, completely empty and, in my opinion, insulting right-wing interests to come in and pretend to stand with working people while doing absolutely nothing to help them, and in many cases going out of their way to make the lives harder for the working poor. I say all of this to say, I have just been thinking about this tweet a lot. As I said, I think it's very naive to think that when Trump goes one way or another, the coalition or this spell he's cast will go away with him. I think that it's already morphed significantly and will continue to morph. And I think JD Vance, for, again, as silly as many of us find him, he has a lot more juice than I think a lot of people are giving him credit for. I think tweets like this are a perfect example of it. Again, it has over 100,000 likes in like a day. And people are really riled up by it. And there's a lot of red meat thrown at a lot of people in there, even though none of it is necessarily being answered in any meaningful way. And again, none of it has anything to do with housing prices. It's still a lot for people to chew on, and to feel acknowledged by, and to feel riled up by. A lot of what we talk about in our December essay, which, I don't want to spoil too much, but essentially when a people are very economically depressed, it is very, very difficult to maintain any kind of cohesive progressive sentiment, especially amongst a very diverse population. People are very easily turned against each other. They are very quick to scapegoat each other, or to sort of allow others to scapegoat their neighbors, and to point, left and right, so that no one is looking up. And I think that this tweet is a perfect example of it. And I think it's a phenomenon that we are seeing more and more, because again, the GOP, I think, is getting smarter, and they're understanding that a very sort of nakedly pro big business agenda, pro corporate agenda, even in some cases sort of libertarian agenda, although it was never really libertarian, is no longer popular. It no longer has the juice with the base. You have to pretend to be economically populist. You have to pretend to be plugged into the issues of the, sort of quote unquote pleb on the ground, even if you have absolutely no intention of solving them, and in many cases are financially invested in making them worse, as with JD Vance and his ties to private equity. I think my closing thought here is that the election of Zoran and his, unprecedented popularity, including with our own president, talk about a girl crush, is very heartening. And I would never dismiss the sort of hope that it gives and the model that it can provide. And it goes to show that even, with as much scapegoating and fear mongering is going on right now, that he got elected as not just an immigrant, but a Muslim. That to me is in and of itself, like, it really goes to show that as effective as some of this rhetoric can be, it's not quite as effective as, actually having sincere values on these issues and actually standing in meaningful policy-driven ways with working people. But it does tell me that there's a long way to go, and that when we think about what we're fighting against as we want to build a more progressive, inclusive, and yes, economically populist future in America, that the interests that oppose it are getting smarter, and they are learning quickly, and I think in large part from Trump, but will carry it on beyond him, that you have to maintain corporate interest, you have to maintain, the interests of the most unregulated possible version of capitalism, that, in almost every single case favors the already wealthy, but you have to do it while pretending to be economically populist. You have to do it while pretending to be with the working men and women. And that is harder to fight against. That is more insidious. That is, you have to really take time to break down a tweet like this and say, hey, yeah, wait, that thing you said at the beginning has actually nothing to do with everything you said after that, even if they sort of all have the veneer of being related. It's a tweet I've been thinking about a lot, and honestly, I just wanted to kind of get that out. I guess my conclusion here is we got to stay vigilant. They're evolving, and we must too. We must root out and defeat this false populist language at any cost. And before I go, because I do ultimately still have a business to support and employees to pay fairly, if you like our content and would like to support us and have been considering downloading a budgeting app to help with your money. And by the way, these 3 brands not only are wonderful companies that we personally use, but also allow us to create videos like this, which is basically unprecedented in the personal finance world. So if you're considering a budgeting app, I use Monarch, love Monarch. It's a really great platform, and it's great whether you're single, married, live with roommates, whatever. It's an all-in-one budgeting platform that I use and check every day. I literally just checked it 30 minutes ago. Advisor, they're our wealth advisory team that we work with. We've worked with them for years now. They're a very small company. We know the team all personally. A huge portion of their clientele is all TFD community members, and they have a fixed flat fee model for financial advisory, which means that their advisors work for you and not for commissions, and everyone gets the exact same treatment regardless of how big their portfolio is, which is not the case at many advisors. And then lastly, if you have been thinking about investing your money, I highly, highly recommend Betterment. It is an app that just makes investing super easy and intuitive, takes very little time to set up. And, for me, apps like that have been absolutely key to getting started in investing regularly, because although some people like to go in and meticulously self-manage their investments, I do not. So I like an app that makes it really easy for me, and Betterment is amazing on that front. So if you want to support us, those are the links down below. Anytime you use them, they really help our company. And again, shout out to those 3 brands for allowing us to speak our truth in a personal finance media environment that is increasingly pretty mask off in terms of the political agenda being quite far right. I actually, while I was on Twitter, saw a few tweets from a prominent personal finance creator who I try to avoid as much as possible on YouTube, but they were pretty damn mask off and conservative. So there's not a ton of us in this space. So we got to stick together. All right, guys. Sorry to have poisoned your brain with that JD Vance tweet, but I think it's worth thinking about. Bye.